Hi, my name is Kayena Hadlock. I am the owner of Kyline, a photography business that operates in Orem, Utah, and I have been doing professional photography for the past 4 years. Today I am here to give you a tutorial on how to use a basic DSLR camera, which is a digital single lens reflex camera, which is basically the professional grade camera. I shoot with Canons. There are several other different brands out there that you can use, but specifically today's demonstration will be using the T3i Rebel. Today's tutorial in full, the thesis statement is basically how to use a DSLR camera to generate a professional looking image. I'm pretty certain that most people don't know how to generate a professional looking image, so I'm here to show you how. I'd like to do that in a 3-step process, basically how to pick out a camera, second, the external essentials for a DSLR camera, and then as a subcategory of that, the internal functions and settings for a DSLR camera, and then third, basically focusing and shooting so that you can get that professional looking image. So starting out, how to pick a DSLR out of all of the digital cameras that are out there in today's stores. A DSLR has a very specific look to it. Most of them come in the gorgeous color of black. They have a larger body, so that's without the lens than most other cameras that are out there that are also digital, and they have specifically a sensor in the inside of the camera, so just that little square that you can see there, that allows you to capture all those gorgeous images. If your camera doesn't look like this, if it's one of those compact little things, those little minis, it is not a real camera. It is not a DSLR. So don't pick one of those. Brands that commonly make DSLR cameras are Canon, Nikon, and Sony. Those are the top brands that most professionals choose to shoot with. There are other brands out there that you can go with, but I believe that the best ones to go with are probably just those three. So moving on to the second part of the tutorial, understanding the outside essentials of your camera. So it's important to know where the on and off button for your camera is. Right here on a Canon we have off and on, and then there's just a little toggle switch that allows you to turn the camera on and off. Usually you'll just do that with your thumb, switching on and off. Here you also have your viewfinder. So just like on any other camera, you'll close the one eye and then you'll open the other eye and you'll look through the viewfinder, which allows you to see what's going on in front of the lens of the camera. You have your lens cap and you actually have your lens. Different lenses do different things. I'm sure you've heard of a fisheye lens. It really kind of blows the proportion out on an image. This is just a standard 18 to 55 millimeter lens. Basically everything that you would shoot on a regular basis, so no like really huge buildings, but maybe like a landscape, a person, whatever, it can do. There's also telephoto lenses out there which shoot things at close range, macro lenses for like those insect close ranges. A telephoto actually allows you to be far away from your subject matter and still to get really close up. And then lastly, you have the wide angle. Usually those are called wide glass lenses because they have a lot of glass that allows them to see really a whole pan sort of view of what's going on. So on every lens there should be a manual focus and automatic focus option. So there's basically just a little toggle here, a little button that you can switch from side to side that allows you to either do AF, automatic focus, or MF, manual focus. To generate a professional image, you always want to be shooting in manual. So you're going to put it on the manual focus side, MF. You want to go ahead and have that stabilizer on. It allows you to have less camera shake. And after that, really, there's not too much you need to know. If you want to be able to go back and look at your pictures, there's usually a play button around here at the base, so that you can look back at your images and cycle through. As far as other external essentials, you need to know where your SD card goes, your memory stick. All of your images that you take through your DSLR camera end up on here. If you shoot or take pictures without having a memory stick in your camera, then you will be at a loss because none of those images will actually be recorded. There's nowhere to record them without a memory card. And then also we have a compartment for the battery, which powers your camera and allows it to do all those functions that it so miraculously does. So you can just stick that right back in there, close it up. This is good. So this particular model is the T3i Rebel Canon camera. It is a DSLR. What I'm actually recording on is the T5i. It's the next step up, and it is also a wonderful camera. It has a better body, so it has more capabilities, better focus. But this is the camera that I started on, and it's a perfectly good entry-level camera. The next step to understanding a DSLR is understanding the internals. So basically what this menu here means when you see it pop up on your DSLR, on your digital camera. I have actually created a bit of a visual aid to help us understand what it is that whole menu means. I'm going to set the camera down over here for a moment, and then we're just going to run through this so that you can understand the different settings that will really make that image happen and make it look professional. So the two most important things when creating a professional image would be focus, and then secondly, exposure. Exposure basically means how well lit your photograph is, and focus just how well tuned in you are on your subject matter. So this M here is not like permanently there. It will change according to the mode that you have your camera set in. I chose to put my camera in manual. Go ahead. I chose to put my camera in manual, so in order to get it there, there's actually a toggle button here at the top, and there's several different letters and several different modes that you can go to, but you're going to change it to M in order to get into manual focus. Manual means that you are going to customize the camera settings according to your needs and your wants so that you can get the sharpest, best image possible, which is pretty cool. Second, you have the shutter speed settings. 1 out of 1000 is just a shutter speed example. This is a shutter speed example for very bright light. This is a very fast shutter speed. Just think of fractions. The tinier that the fraction is 1 out of 1000, for instance, the faster your shutter is going to move. So when you hear your camera sort of clicking, that little sound that it makes, that is the shutter opening and closing. And when it closes, basically it shuts out all light that would be recorded in that particular phase for the sensor. Go on for the sensor. And then if you have a slower shutter speed, that means that more light's gonna be let in. It's kind of the same for the next setting here, except for that this also determines, excuse me, I'm sorry for that, my daughter. It determines how much light is going to be hitting the sensor, as well as shallow depth of field or depth of field that's not so shallow. Shallow depth of field, I'm pretty sure we've all seen it. It's basically those images where something is very sharply in focus, but everything in front of it and behind it are not in focus. And so if you have an aperture setting, so basically an aperture setting, in other words, is an f-stop. If you have an f-stop set at 5.6, that is a fairly large aperture, and you will have a shallow depth of field. It's really a counterintuitive way of understanding and thinking. Basically, the smaller the number is, the larger the aperture is going to be, and the larger the number is, the smaller the aperture is going to be. The aperture is specifically how wide of a hole you have operating there in the front of your camera. So here you can see the lens, and when I change my aperture settings, either this hole here in the middle of the camera is going to get wider or smaller. So at f22 it's going to be a fairly small hole, and then at f5.6 it's going to be a fairly large hole. ISO, this is basically a setting for how sensitive you want your sensor, that little square in the middle of the camera, to be to light. If basically in high light situations where there's lots of light, you will not need to up the ISO. But if you're in a dark situation, say it's a wedding, it's indoors, and there's really not much light going on, they don't have, I don't know, extra strobe lights or anything like that, you would probably end up bumping up your ISO so that you can actually get an image that shows up in the camera instead of just looking like a black image. It is not a good idea to bump up the ISO more than you need to in any given situation, because if you do bump it up too high, it's very likely that your image will come out noisy. Noisy basically is an image that looks pixelated and kind of grungy. Secondly, here on the second line for the menu, you have your meter. It's basically a light meter, and images that are right in the middle at 0 are perfectly exposed. So that's exactly what we want. When you look through your viewfinder, you will see at the bottom of the viewfinder, just like at the bottom of the window there, this exact scale. It shows up in your LCD display, just like we were talking about before, but it also shows up in that viewfinder. So -3 will show up on the left side, and on the right side you'll have +3. +3 is leaning towards overexposed, -3 is leaning towards underexposed. So there's a little dot that appears just basically in this space, and when you see it appearing over here, you're going to have to actually take a little toggle wheel that actually will allow you to cycle through any section of this menu, and rotate it so that your little dot moves over towards the 0. If you are turning the wheel, which is right here, and nothing is really happening, you're probably turning it in the wrong direction. So try turning it in the opposite direction to get it to move towards the 0 so that you can get a proper exposure. That is extremely important. That and the focus are the most important parts of photography. If you can do that, you can do anything. Here we have basically the setting for the type of photography that you're doing. P stands for portrait. So this is the best setting for taking a portrait of a person or an animal or whatever your subject matter may be. This is probably the next important thing, second only to focus and exposure. Basically, this setting here is a little sun, because it stands for the type of weather that you're shooting in if you're doing outdoor photography. So you can be shooting in daylight. This is daylight setting, so the sun. If you're shooting on a cloudy day, you would toggle through using that same little wheel that I just showed you, and it'll show like a little cloud icon. And then there's also shooting in the shade, and there's also AWB. It'll show up just exactly as those letters, AWB, and that stands for auto white balance, and the camera will actually automatically choose the white balance for you, so you don't really have to worry so much about what's going on with the white balance. Then there's tungsten and fluorescent lights, depending upon whether or not you're shooting under tungsten or fluorescent lights indoors. The camera actually has settings for those things as well. So that is your white balance. And then here, this is, we already know that we're focusing manually, but MF stands for manual focus. So you know that your camera is set for focusing manually. You can see that in the front of your camera without having to move around and cock your head to see which focusing you're using. Single shooting is the next box here. Single shooting means that you're just taking one picture at a time versus continuous shooting where you hold the button down, it'll rapid fire take pictures one after another, or self-timed shooting where you will press the button and the camera will do that function that we've all seen where it goes beep, 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 and it basically is saying, okay, get in front of the camera because I'm going to take a picture in this amount of seconds. You can set it to the amount of seconds that you want it to take the picture in. This is evaluative metering symbol. It's very complicated when it comes down to it, but basically for a professional looking shot when you're an entry-level photographer, just go ahead and use evaluative metering and make sure that you do not have a subject matter that's in lots of shade and then a blown out background. Make sure that the light is fairly even when you're shooting, otherwise that might complicate things. This is actually just telling you the quality of image that you're going to be recording. Here, this is just a symbol for basically the fact that I'm recording on a JPEG setting for this particular video. But when you're looking to create a professional looking image, you absolutely must make sure that you are shooting in RAW. There's a little button that pops up, it looks just like this and it'll say RAW right in the middle, and you always want to shoot in RAW because RAW means that you are going to get the best image quality possible. Basically, the camera will take everything that it can from that environment, from that subject matter that you're shooting, and make the best possible image that it can. It'll take all that information and just really group it in and stick it right there on your SD card. Otherwise, other things will be cut out of the image, not that you can visually see, but background information that allows you to, in post-production, better manipulate the image will be taken away. And we don't want that. We want to be able to manipulate the image as much as we can, bend it and twist it. So you always want to shoot in RAW. And then lastly, we have here just the amount of battery that you're using. Make sure your battery is always fully charged. And then here, how many images you have. This is very important to know. If you are planning on going on a shoot and you're doing it for somebody that you don't know especially much, you want to make sure that you always have enough space on your SD card to capture as many images as you think are likely and then more than likely to capture. Entry-level photographers do take a ton of photographs, and so do professional photographers. So always be prepared with extra SD cards. That way you have space enough to capture every image and you won't have that embarrassing time when you're like, oh, I don't have another SD card to keep all of the images on. Okay, and then lastly, we're gonna focus on focusing and shooting. Like I said before, you should make sure that the light situation in which you're in is a good one. Make sure that your subject is well lit, make sure that it's not in shadow, and make sure that your background or any other part of what's in the frame is not overexposed. That way you can use evaluative metering and still get a professional looking image. It's the easiest way to do it. So with manual focus, once again, you're going to toggle that little button over to MF, and then you have basically these gripping areas on your lens that allow you to do all the major tuning and then the fine tuning. As you do this, you are going to make sure that your hand is not up here. It's easier to get your fingers in the way of the lens and into the picture that you actually capture if you're trying to keep your fingers up and above the field of focus. So make sure that you're adjusting using these two gripping areas, just like that. And you want to close that one eye and just use those hands to really fine tune. You can focus on a certain part of your subject, specifically the eyes, and the whatever subject is closest to you, and in your picture frame is what you're going to want to mainly focus on. It looks wrong if the things in the foreground are out of focus and then the things way in the background are in focus. So focus what's in the foreground, focus on eyes, and make sure that those are sparkly clear in your viewfinder before you click down for the actual shooting of the image. And as I was saying before, in your viewfinder you can see how well you're doing as far as light metering. Make sure that you toggle back and forth to change the shutter speed so that you can capture an image that is properly exposed. That is basically the A, B, and C of how to take a professional looking photograph. Thank you for joining me today. Again, my name is Kai Hadlock, and I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. I really hope that you go out into the world and just take the best images that you can. Can you imagine a world without gorgeous images? If we didn't have them, I think it would be a pretty boring place. So congratulations on your new DSLR, and I hope to see you out there shooting. Bye.